Party people, welcome to another edition of For the Players. I'm K Murdoch. This is Harvey Newman representing Proxima Studio, and we are here to just talk video games with you all today. And for this topic, much like my other topics, I would like to say I came up with this topic while in the shower, which is for some people might be too much information, but it's a great place. I usually have the best ideas form in the shower, Yep. But I can't take credit for coming up with today's topic. I actually have to give credit to technology. I use ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. I literally typed in a prompt and, just said, I work on a show, a podcast about video games, and I need some topics to talk about how video games are made. And it came out with some amazing recommendations. And I have used ChatGPT before. It's the future, and I have no problem admitting I use AI and technology. I went and got a master's degree in audio technology. I love it. It's the way of the future. And I think the way you do it is use it as a tool. Don't, create stuff and put it out, still have the human touch to kind of look over and make sure everything is A-okay before you publish. But anyway, long story short, ChatGPT, shout out them, because today's topic, which finally let me talk about, is going to be the evolution of video game engines. And I think this is it's kind of a no-brainer for us to talk about, because I feel like we've talked about Unreal and Unity. I think last episode we talked a little bit about proprietary stuff like Frostbite, the engine that you all worked on when you were doing Battlefield. And who better to talk about this than someone like yourself, Harvey, who's worked in video games for 2 decades plus and has seen probably all kinds of engines. And I think first thing to I guess explain is what is your best summation of what a video game engine is and what it does?
The wonderful world of engines is so complicated to answer the question, because
give me the Cliff Notes, the abbreviated one, and then obviously the rest of the show will be kind of expounding,
Exactly, yeah, because it's difficult, because that's basically where when you actually tell your mom or your family about what you do, that's when they switch off. At that point, when you start talking about the end, you're like, what? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Right.
So, but yeah, basically an engine is very much like the brains behind any game that you play, right? So whenever you're actually making a movie, and most people will know this, there's you shoot it, and then it goes into film, and then basically people edit that film, and they render it all, and then you get that film done. Bob's your uncle. However, for games, everything is real time, what they call it, so which means that everything is running at the same time.
Right.
Which means that you have to work with that engine for the duration of the game. It's not just going to be in the end you'd edit the movie like a director would do, or a production house would do. So it's not a linear pipeline. So the engine is in the middle, and then basically everybody's pumping things into the engine, seeing it in real time, and then the more you develop the game, the more game it looks, a final game. And then in the end, that's when you basically render, and I'm actually making hair quotes here.
Right.
Because in reality, what goes into the disc, because that's what you would do in a film, right? You render it and put it in the film. Here's your Blu-ray. Now you can watch it or whatever. But now, I'm just taking the analogy just for discs because it's easier to understand. But the same thing happens digitally. But in games, when you actually put it all in a disc, or you actually have it digitally aligned somewhere, doesn't matter if it's Steam or in any other shop, basically when you download an executable so you can run that game, what is actually calling is basically a mini version of that engine, so you can render the things real time, right? So it's basically part of that engine stays with the game, so you can actually render things in real time. So yeah, that's the easiest definition I can find. But
that's a great kind of summation of when I think of game engines, I equate it to a car engine. A car engine is the car, makes the car go. It's the everything kind of roots to it as the core, and because of it, all the things can operate. Because obviously, without an engine, even electronic cars need, you know what I mean? Like their computers, essentially, these new EVs, they need an engine to go to operate and be able to move. And when you were talking about, I guess, what is the term? So you mentioned like rendering. I guess in audio we use terms like bounce, like when I do all this stuff in Pro Tools and make all this like multi-track, like the song, for instance, when I'm making a
Yeah.
song has all these different tracks with effects and stuff that
Yeah.
I'm using. But ultimately, what you hear when you listen to Spotify, or us older guys when we used to listen to CDs and cassette tapes,
Yeah.
is you're hearing a printed version of, like, usually like a stereo track, a left and right track of a bounce version, or they used to use tape to record everything, and now digital, it's all digital. So
Yeah. Yeah.
or the other term we use is print, which is nice too, because it kind of has a analog kind of vibe to it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So but yeah, so we use render in
Yeah.
video games. I'm using air quotes too for those who are listening. So
Like we don't use render actually. Like this
okay.
is mostly for film. So, like by the way, you guys in audio have the best terms. Bounce sounds so cool. Like immediately I know what it is. So cool. But no, for a game is actually a build. That's what we call
Okay.
it.
Okay, got you.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, when you have different builds that you start doing, so, creating. So basically, what happens is, if you think about each department, once again, going back to film, just because it's the closest thing to actually
Hmm.
explain linearity in film. If you go back to film, so you have the animation department working and the art department and design, and everybody's working at the same time. At some point, they have to put things in game to see how it works, so we can play it, so we can feel it, so we can see
Right.
how it is. So at some point, like builds need to be triggered, right? And builds is very much doing this, the same thing that you would do in the end, which is very much like aggregating all the assets that everybody has made
Right.
and then put it on an executable that then people can double click and then play it without having anything broken, right? But normally it's very broken as you go through it.
That's why patches are made, right? Like,
Exactly.
okay.
So you have builds. So the reality of it is that you spend, let's say a game takes 4 years to make, right? You spend about 3 years of those 4 years with a broken build. Most of the time, things don't work.
Right.
Things are semi-final. Some of the things are work in progress. The textures are not visible. All the textures say work in progress. Everything is red.
Right, right, right.
Horrible, right? But you still have to play it. So you continuously make builds, and to a point that if you have a studio big enough and a team big enough, you actually get to a point that we haven't reached yet at Proxima, which normally engineers that do like what's called a cook of a build overnight.
Oh, I
So
love
every
the
night,
terminology, man. It
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, they cook builds overnight. So basically, like AK in our team, our
Right.
engineer. So
Right.
he's already asking for that to actually be able to cook builds overnight, which means that every time that we're all down not working on the build or on the game, it
Right.
will cook a build. So in the morning when we come up, come
It's ready.
it's
It's
ready.
prepared.
Exactly. 9 times out of 10 in the beginning, when you double click that executable, it doesn't even open. So then all of a sudden, it's all about what's broken and what broke the build. And there's always somebody that breaks the build at some point. So you have to constantly kind of address those issues until eventually you get a build that actually works most of the time. So it goes for
Right.
like, almost in percentages. And then eventually, I mean, it's not a straight line, but if it was eventually when those builds start coming in really nice and everything starts coming together and the game starts feeling really good, then we will actually do what's called a hardening, which is like towards the last year of the
Mm.
game, towards
Hmm.
6 months or so. And hardening basically means that whatever goes in the executable in the build is very much what the end customer is going to see. And I'm oversimplifying here because so many things happen in between.
Yes.
But that's very much like the hardening is like we need to actually everything that we add needs to be final, right? And then we just keep on adding until there's nothing else final to add. And when we actually have that, then at that point we need to actually kind of like start doing what's called a release candidate is called. And the release candidate is very much like having a final build. And how most of the time when you start doing release candidates, the very first five, the first five ones, they always like have some problems, right? Either QA finds a bunch
Mm.
of bugs on it, or
Okay.
the build doesn't work on a specific console, or I don't know, it doesn't run for whatever reason, or it has like, I don't know, some kind of like, flaw that people can exploit. So people are looking for those things that perhaps we haven't really been looking at before. And
Right.
eventually you get a build that is like, a release candidate that feels pretty solid. And then that release candidate, how we've been talking about these QA testers that actually test for Microsoft and Sony to make sure that they actually, like, people don't miss
Yeah.
certain rules. So then you have to submit those builds to those houses. So Sony, Microsoft, and all these people can say it's good to go. PC, there's
Right.
no need for that.
Right.
And then eventually you have a gold master. And that's basically what
The
is the
Gold
final.
Master.
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you print discs, that's what gets printed on a disc, right? Nowadays, most games don't actually get print discs at all. I mean,
Right.
do not many. Nintendo keeps doing it as well,
Right.
but normally you have print masters that goes to the disk, but then in the background there's always like updates that keep happening. So as of the
Right.
last 5, 10 years, even though you have a disk in your hand, when you put your disk in the console, what happens day one is you get an update, and that's basically us working after the Gold Master on patching stuff that actually came after we actually got it solid.
Man, so many questions. Well, just trying to think about things that are like analogous from what you were saying to audio. Like, for us, like, think again, using the example of making music. Usually, music, you get to your final mix. The final mix is what is sent to mastering. Mastering is essentially just like making sure it reaches the same like level as far as like audio perception and just like it, that is what usually gets printed on a disc. That's why if you read track listings, it's like album mixed by, songs mixed by, album mastered by. That's like the last step in the finalization. And for film, usually it's what they call picture lock. That means like, hey,
Yep.
this is the cut we're going with, and from there, the only things you would do is maybe doing coloring for like, just making sure everything, tweaking things. But what you see as far as the story and the narrative is locked in, like it's all good. So it's really cool to hear these terms and hear things that like, oh, okay, that's I can it's analogous to this, or it's
Yeah.
comparable to that.
Completely, and that's something that we once another thing that we keep talking here in the podcast is that the industry is young,
Right.
and I think like one of the not issues, but one of the things that we have to get used to in this industry is exactly that. Like in film and music, is very much like it's a process so nailed in that
Right.
basically when you say master, it's final,
Right.
right? Or
Right.
film picture lock, it is locked, right?
Right.
And me and you, we had like that conversation before when you say, Harvey, just send me the picture log version, and then I can
Oh
edit.
yeah, yeah. For
And
the
then I'm like,
trailers and stuff.
but like it's difficult because it's an organic process in games.
Yes,
So
I get it.
the idea of being picture locked or to be mastered and stuff, especially nowadays that you can just do over the air updates. And I sound old saying this, but but that you can update things so easily. It's tempting to basically not really have anything to truly final, especially if it's an online game. You just
Right.
can continuously update the game forever and ever and ever.
Right.
But it comes with its downsides because now most gamers are actually starting to pick up on the idea that games never seem to be final nowadays. They seem to actually come with all
Right.
kinds of issues that it takes years for them to address it, and then it takes more years for them to actually polish it. So, like, there's pros and cons to how we used to make games before, where when you go like the master of the game and you print that disc, if you have bugs on that disk, it stays on that disk,
Right.
and then you are going to be known for that, for those bugs. You're like, I
Right.
remember, because you and I know games that we're like, oh, you remember that bug that was really
Yeah.
funny on this
Yeah.
game. Everybody knows about that. Now you can just squash those bugs and basically make the game always better, right?
Mm.
Yeah, it's just pros and cons on what works best, but yeah, you can virtually develop a game forever nowadays.
Well, it's interesting too because when you came into the industry, this was like right after the shift from going from like physical, well, like, there was still physical stuff, but it was cartridges or say to like more CD based stuff, and then obviously Nintendo did the small disc and stuff for like what is it, the GameCube and all this
Yeah.
stuff. So, but like I just think about that, like it's almost, well, I've never bought a cartridge game where there was a game-ending bug that would kill the game. So it's like when the stuff got printed to a cartridge, it had to be super polished and final. It's like, so it's kind of like, man, like with the advent of technology today, like you said, that people can keep
Yeah.
fixing stuff, and it kind of makes it cheapens the experience, because it's like, dude, when I buy the game, this should be the final fucking game. So
100%. It's like it's the equivalent of, like, in cinema about 5-10 years ago, it used to be like, we'll fix it in post.
right, right, right,
And they'll add VFX to it. The ones
right,
who were
right,
like, oh, we'll just add a VFX here to fix this problem,
right,
right?
right,
But then it looks super cheap nowadays because it looks kind of cheesy, right?
right.
And I think games is going through that situation right now. I think we need to bring back
Wow.
some of that. If you go master, if you develop, if you release a game, you should at least be with that mentality that you have no bugs and the game can actually be like in this condition 100% until the end of his life. And if you actually update the game, then it's going to be for minor things or polishy things more than actually just like, game crashing bugs. Because a lot of developers feel like we'll fix it later. We'll fix it on a 0-day patch.
Right,
We'll fix it
right.
on a, there was actually like the first month patch, and then it was like the first day patch, and then there was
Now
like
it's 0 day.
0-day patch. As soon as you put the disk, doesn't update immediately. So yeah, it's basically it's people trying to get more time to finish the game, which is understandable because it takes a
Right.
lot of effort and there's so many
Of course.
departments and all that stuff. But it becomes a problem sometimes.
So I think about the last game that I remember that people were really heated about, as far as like, I guess, needing a 0-day patch or like needing fixes right when it came out. And it was crazy because it was a AAA game, with Cyberpunk. Like,
Cyberpunk, yeah, infamous for
so
that.
what do you think went into that? Because surely the developers had to know, like, yo, I guess they needed to meet the quota. This is the deadline of all the promotions, said this game is dropping this date. So
Yeah.
for them to go ahead and put that game out, like, that's kind of like whack, to be like, yo, we know the game is fucked up, but we
Yeah.
still unfortunately have to put it out. But luckily they were able to do patches, but it kind of, for some people, really fucked up and ruined the experience.
It
You
did,
know?
and the problem is when you actually lose the initial audience with some other stuff like that, normally you lose them forever. So maybe some people came back, but so
Right.
many people got burned out that they probably never came back, no matter
Right.
how many good stories they heard about the updates. We got that in Battlefront 2.
Right.
So it hurts, still hurts today. But going back to the engine situation, like a CDPR, CD Projekt Red, they use their own engine, right?
Okay.
And this is a humongous part of the equation on why these things happen. Because here's when you have your own engine, right? And CDPR, as far as I know, and this is just out there already, for The Witcher 4 that they're going to work on, they're going to use
Right.
Unreal 5. And I think it's a super smart move because
Okay.
any studio that has their own engine nowadays, except for Epic, they need to do two things at the same time, and two things that are incredibly hard at the same time, which is very much like develop an engine and continuously develop an engine. An engine is never fully finished.
Right.
Doesn't matter if it's like Frostbite or like, Unreal or whatever, you can tell there's always
Right.
constant updates.
Right.
So they have to have a part of the studio internally developing that engine so it matches the skills and the look and the amazement of what the project needs, but also what tech is out there. So if NVIDIA has RTX, whatever, or it has
Right.
like a really good tech, we need that tech in our engine. So we need to implement it. We need engineers. We need all kinds of people just working on that tech.
Mm,
And then it needs to be easy enough for the team to be able to use it to create the game to a certain standard. So, like, we've been talking here for many episodes about how hard it is to develop a game, and that's just the development side of things.
right. Right. Right.
They are doing development and engine making at the same time. And if this was maybe 20 years ago when everybody had their own engine very much virtually, it would be easier because people were used to kind of like develop games with their own engine, and it was
Mm,
easier because it's your own engine, you can tweak things your own way and you can create your own tech to do certain hair or volumetric clouds or
right.
whatever it is. You can just do it yourself instead of just waiting for Epic to do an update on their engine. But things have gone so far now and it's so developed and it's so intricate. And Blueprint is this, for those that don't know, Blueprint is very much like a node-based coding
Yeah.
system
Yes.
created by Unreal. That's the most simplest thing that I can put it. And it's called visual scripting. Well, there's lots of different kinds of visual scripting, but
Right.
in Unreal, the visual scripting is Blueprint, and allows anybody, including myself, people like myself that don't like coding very much, to
Right.
just put a few notes together with some arrows and some formulas,
This
and
works when this hits this, this triggers that, and yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. If this, then that. It's easy
yeah.
enough to understand that visually you can see what's going
Oh
on.
yeah, 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 yeah.
There's little arrows telling you what's happening. There's little like no's telling you that this is not happening.
Right,
So you can just debug things really easily. So because Unreal is so advanced and everybody's trying to pick up pace with it, it's hard for people to kind of start developing all this tech. So I think, and this is me completely assuming, even though I know a few people at CDPR, but I don't know nothing about the internals of what happened
mm,
in the game. But I do think that they probably hit a bunch of barriers on both. They were like probably like super like ambitious with the game in many ways. We can create this tech, and then we can create these systems,
right,
and then is the engine team saying we can definitely create these things, and is the team saying we can definitely create these systems. And then when when the push comes to shove and is getting close to the release date, turns out these things are not happening yet. So how can we
right.
make them happen? So by the time you release, you probably release with a game that was less than. But now is correct to what they promised originally, but it took way longer than they expected as well.
Wow.
So this is why having your own engine throws a massive wrench in the works, because you're trying to develop two things at the same time. While if you actually use Epic's engine, which is Unreal, which is the most popular nowadays, or Unity
Right.
engine, they have teams solely developing an engine. So they do nothing but the engine. Epic has games as well, Fortnite and stuff,
Of
but that's
course.
completely
Right.
different. They
Right.
have enough
That's a
money to
different division of their company. Right.
completely different division. But Epic was set up to actually build this engine. That's it,
Right.
Unreal, and
Unreal.
that's basically what put them in the map. They had a few games for sure before then, but Unreal was their like Steam for Valve, right? Like the
Mm,
thing that put them in the map. Well, maybe Valve not so much, but like the thing that put them in the map. Like they had an engine better than anybody, and then they solely focused on this engine for so many years, and then they went back to making games again, and they do it better than anybody. So everybody's starting to adopt Unreal because it takes that part of the equation out, right?
right.
Yeah.
Man, oh man, it's like every time you talk, it's like in my brain. It's speaking of nodes. I have like so many nodes that are like spawning off as far as like questions. I'm so curious because all right, growing up,
Mm.
when you turn on a video game, it was always weird to like you see obviously the developer and the publisher like Konami, and then all these screens before you actually get to the title screen. But
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
around like the 2000s, the early aughts, you started seeing Unreal Engine, and or if you're playing, for me, it was more web-based games. You would see the Unity logo pop up, and I was always like, "Yo, what the fuck is that?" Like I never knew what it was, but now, I mean, I know what it is now. But it's crazy to think that like those. Why do you think it is that those two engines are so popular and like ubiquitous across the gaming? Is it just because they've been around the longest, and like you said, because they have dedicated teams to help troubleshoot and create tools, or what?
Not really, actually, and that's a great question. I actually it used to be.
Okay, okay,
So there's a few engines that actually gave Unreal a run for their money.
okay,
And I don't remember all the names because there's been so many, because everybody
right,
had their engine at some point in time.
right,
But there's been a few engines over time that actually gave Unreal a run for their money. But the one that actually kind of like was the biggest competitor for the longest time, almost like Nintendo and Sega.
right,
So the Sega of Unreal, right? In this analogy, the
right.
Unreal being
That's
Nintendo,
a no. Yeah, I got it.
right? It was actually Nintendo called sorry, Nintendo, an engine called Frostbite. Do you remember
Okay.
Frostbite?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. So Frostbite was developed by Crytek. Crytek developed Crysis. The Crysis did
Crisis. That
games,
game
right?
alone was like the ultimate demo of the technology. Like,
Exactly.
yeah,
And for a long time, everybody thought, well, not for a long time, maybe 10 years or so. It's a long time. People thought like, CryEngine was slightly better than Unreal,
right.
mainly because like, that line, can it run Crysis? Do you remember that stuff?
Oh yeah, yeah,
People,
yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
were
Because
like, can it?
it ran at 60 frames per second. It was like you would need the best computer to achieve.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. And he basically at that point in time was very much like almost like a badge of honor. If you can run Crysis, then you have the best computer possible because this is the best engine possible in
Of
the best
course.
game
Of
possible.
course.
So it became like a marketing thing for them that worked really well. And the game, in all honesty, at that point in time, like the jungle, the visuals, the artwork, and all
Right.
this, they look like better than any other engine, right? And it was very much tete a tete at some point. Like they were both there,
Right.
and this was before Unreal was free for everybody. You had to pay a license to use Unreal, and you had to pay a license to use CryEngine. But like the master stroke for Unreal for Epic was that around 2011, I want to say 2012, they actually made Unreal free for everybody.
Wow. Game
And
changer.
game changer. So they basically said you can use our engine if you actually have like if you're an indie developer, and then what happens is that if you publish your game, we take 5% off of your
Ah, okay. That's smart.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, up to a certain number. And
All
then
right.
if you actually make lots of millions, then maybe it's like, 10%, or like
Right.
not thousands, you get 10%. If you have millions, then maybe it's 20 or 30%. So they
Okay.
take a cut of your sales depending on how much your game does. But within that model, they have like publishers and other developers that want to use their engine and can afford it. They can pay for a license like before and basically have all the profit if they want. They're just using their engine.
Ah, okay. That's actually like genius.
So they have both things, right? They have like
Right.
the indie consumer, and now they have the
Right.
studios as well. Both things, and that was the stroke of genius, because what a lot of people don't know about proprietary engines is that you need a whole lot of documentation, internal documentation, for those engines to let people internally to use those engines. And what where some of these engines went wrong and where Epic went really well, and it sounds like a small thing, but it's a huge thing,
Right.
is basically documenting things incredibly well about their engines. One, right? And second, it was because they put it in the hands of pretty much everybody that wanted to use it. All of a
Right.
sudden, YouTube started kind of popping up with every single tutorial that you can think imaginable to man. So anything they want to do in Unreal, you can do it because you can just YouTube it and then find out how to set up blueprint or how to actually set up animations or
Right.
whatever it is.
Right.
Everything is there on YouTube. You don't have to read the documentation. It's just you have YouTubers working for you. And even if you go to the Epic website, you have documentation up to wazoo. I have worked in engines, and I'm not going to name names, but I have worked in engines where internally you don't know how to use certain things, and you have to go to the person that created the specific feature to find out how to use it. So it's word of mouth, which then if that person leaves the studio, then that feature basically becomes
Is
redundant because nobody knows
wow.
how to use it.
Right.
And then the more people leave the studio with that knowledge in their heads with no documentation, it means that the more knowledge leaves the studio.
Right.
Engine are super complex. It's like, I don't know, building like a rocket that's basically engines. So if you actually start losing all that knowledge, all that know-how, then nobody knows how to use the engine properly. And then you're using the engine not at 100%, you're using the engine at about 80%.
Right. Right.
And it's hard. It's really hard to actually kind of like use an engine when it's specific and it has specific traits, and only like the 10% can use it properly.
On a team, like especially for like I guess like studios with budgets to do that, would the goal be to hire somebody specifically who is like a master at whatever engine, and what is that person like
Mm.
what is that role called? Is that the
So
technical
yeah,
designer or okay?
no, no, no. So you have like engine engineer or head of
Okay.
engineering, or there's
Okay.
many different names, but there's always somebody like whoever is on top of, like, sometimes CTO, right? Chief
Got you.
Technology Officer.
That makes sense. That makes
Yeah,
sense. And
that's the
they
person.
just do all the technical stuff, no creative stuff. They make it easy for the creative people to do their job, basically.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. But this is where another problem arises. Many problems in the games industry where we are in the studio so focused at building a game that a lot of the times you don't have time to kind of document things as you make them, because you
Right.
just need that tool
You
to do
just
the
get it
thing.
done.
Yeah, and we have very little time, so just do the thing and put it out. And now there's the next game, so we just need to focus on the next game. And
Right.
what kind of features do we need? Let's do the features, document them later. But what kind of other features do we need? And we just keep on going in these circles where we're just doing things, but we're not documenting things. We're not taking time to document things.
Right.
And when we don't have like, somebody like Epic that has a whole department to document things and making sure that they actually visualize, they have now whole videos and stuff and presentations on how certain features you work, right? And
Right.
people on stage like showcasing and all that stuff, mentorships about how these things work. So if you don't have that, If you don't have that infrastructure, then it means that things get lost. And because nobody outside of the studio or studios, they actually not using these tools, so nobody knows how hard it is. And because
Right.
you are under NDA as a software developer,
I get it.
you are frustrated, and but it's not like you can say much about it. I mean, you can talk to people and vent your frustrations internally, but the world will never know that these things happen.
Wow. Man, it's just,
Yeah.
oh man, it's amazing to me. Like, just even thinking back to, I think one of the original, I guess, deterrents for me getting into video games. I'm kind of gonna go back here. So when I was in high school, I'm dating myself. When I was in high school, I actually took computer programming languages. I took Pascal and C++. I
Nice.
don't even think they even offer Pascal anymore. That's like
I
super
haven't
antiquated.
I haven't heard of that name in a while. I have heard of it. I haven't heard it in a while. No.
And it all started because I was like, I want to learn how to make video. That was kind of like the hook to get me into classes. Like we'll work on video games, very rudimentary. Like if this, then that.
Yeah.
So I did it, and I quickly learned like I do not like this side of it. I do not like the technical behind the user interface, the graphics, but I appreciated it, and so. I decided to go into like the more creative side, like getting into audio, but it kind of happened again. A few years ago, I went and got a master's degree in audio technology. And one of the classes I had to take was basically learning how to code and make the effect plugins that I use to make things and do sound design.
Oh, I
We
see.
were doing that stuff. And so we used a program called MathLab, which had a lot of if this, then that, and a lot of numbers. And it once again, I did get a B in the class. It was the only B I got for my whole master's. I got A's and everything else. So I like kind of to this day, I'm like, damn it, that class was the bane of my existence at getting that. But I walked away with a huge appreciation that when I pull up these cool plugins that do things like stem separation and adding delay and like making things sound like this, I was like, now I kind of understand like behind the GUI, there's so much stuff happening. And so the people that do that coding, those more technical engineers, I have nothing but the highest respect for them, and now I understand why they get paid the big bucks.
hundred
Like,
percent. They're normally the highest paid people because
yeah, I
without them
get
there will
it.
be no game. That like without
Yes.
the engine, without the tooling, that's it. Yeah.
Yep. Have you when you I know when you started out from going to QA to animation, did you ever dabble, or did you? I know you mentioned like you've done blueprinting and dealing with the coding and stuff, but for the most part, I assume you're kind of like me. You're more of a right brain as opposed to left brain technical. You like being more on the creative spectrum. But for what you do in animation, how important is it to know like coding and working in an engine and stuff?
But like you don't have to know anything.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes in my channel, people ask me like I heard animation requires math. How much math do I need to know to become an animator? Like, you need to know zero math to become an
Right.
animator because I don't know much, and
Right.
I'm not great at math as well. So like no, like I never really dabbled in it. Like the most I have done was basically the visual scripting, the blueprinting that I
Right.
mentioned before, because I was just curious, and it's visual and it has colors, so
Right.
I'm down
Yeah,
with
I'm the
that.
same way. I learn better when I see things. Like it just something kicks in, and I'm like, okay, that makes way more sense. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was, okay, so talking about game engines, and obviously we talked about Unreal and Unity, and I remember, man, what was it when Metal Gear was hot? I want to say they had the Fox engine. That was like, I guess, a proprietary engine that Kojima made.
But yeah, like yeah, Kojima had like the Fox engine for the longest time, and I think
Right.
they still use it even though he's no longer there.
Right.
But yeah, the Fox engine was actually quite awesome to do so many things, and he was a pro at using that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, like he had so many, like there was physics, there was, I mean, yeah, they were doing things that no other engine was doing at that time, especially with physics at a specific time. It was so cool to actually see.
But back in the day, like say, like for like the games we used to play on like Nintendo cartridges and stuff,
Yeah.
does Nintendo have a proprietary like I guess engine for like I mean, every Mario they make is literally, for the most part, very different, which is cool because it's almost like they say, whatever we did last time, we're going resetting, and the only thing that stays consistent is that we're in the Mario universe. These characters are going to be in it, but how they look and how they act and what they do is going to change. So
Yeah.
does Nintendo have proprietary, like, and I'm just using Nintendo as an example. I'm sure Sony, Sega, they all do, but like, what is the Mario engine called? Is it just like,
We don't know the Nintendo
okay,
engine. We don't know. At least I don't know. Maybe
okay,
there's like some information out there that I don't know. But as far as I know, there is no information. I haven't really heard of any information about a specific engine. But
okay,
I think Nintendo does this on purpose because, and this is why they are so smart, right? Because like the difference between like the Eastern developers and Western developers is that I feel like we kind of like focus a little bit more on the tech, like
right,
how fast, how high def is it, how many things can you do with it, and all that stuff. And I think for the Eastern developers, especially the Japanese developers, it's all about the game. Like
right,
how is this game made? Like we don't know what engine like Elden Ring has used. We just
yeah,
know it's
right, right,
a badass game,
right.
right? And like that for every single other like Eastern game that you actually can think of. And Nintendo is the biggest. Like they update their engine all the time, and I know that because I was watching a doc the other day about Super Mario Bros. 3, I think it was,
Hmm.
when they actually released it for the Nintendo 64, I want to say, or something like that. And no, that wasn't Mario 64. It was the Super Nintendo.
Yes,
When they went from the SNES to the Super Nintendo, they actually had to release Super Mario Bros. 3, and they had to update the engine because the console could do more things, and it was 16-bit and all these other things. So they had to upgrade the engine to make sure that they could like take the most out of the console. And as usual, the first few games of Nintendo are normally the ones that actually showcase what the console can do the most, right?
right, right.
So they had to do that. But it's not so much about the engine and what the engine can do, it's about like what this game can push the console to do, which is great.
Man, yeah, because I feel like every time Nintendo comes, I mean, I guess it's no surprise. Like Mario is like one of their biggest. I mean, it is their biggest IP and draw. So it's like whenever a new Nintendo game comes out or a Nintendo system, they usually launch very close with like a Mario game or I guess a Zelda game, right? Because it's not only people, the familiarity brings people back, but it's
Yep.
also cool because it shows what the system can do. And you know that for the most part, like going forward, like a lot of the games that come subsequently are going to look similar or be able to do similar things. And I think that's awesome. It's almost like they use Mario as the demo, like because they know it's safe, you know, like no,
Exactly.
everyone's going to buy a Mario game, you know?
And that's exactly like I think that's the stroke of genius of Nintendo because they kind of like started this thing of like using their flagship title that not only moves units but also showcase you what to do. The Nintendo Wii
Right.
is another example, right?
Right.
The Nintendo Wii, like when you had the Wii Sports, which is a brand new title, it was all about showcasing what the console could do,
Right.
as you could actually kind of like play with the console. Nintendo Switch was the same thing. With the first few games that came out, you could take the controllers out, do certain things, put the
Right.
controllers in, do certain things.
Right.
So I love that idea. And then a few like other like Sony specifically, but publishers started doing the same thing, console makers, and you can tell by like Astro's Playroom when they released the
Oh yeah,
PS1,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? They actually had like the demo, right? And everybody saw how like because if you remember when the PS5 came out, everybody was kind of like wondering about the new controller because it looks
Right.
kind of like the old controller, slightly
Right.
different. What's new about the new controller? And everybody's like, oh, you need to feel it. It's like something you have to feel. You don't understand. And they're like, yeah, but it looks the same. I'm like, what's the big fuzz? And then you played Astro's Playroom, and then you realize why the controller was special. It was like, oh yeah, this is different. This is really cool, right?
Right.
And that's basically what they did for the console. But what Nintendo distills even further is the fun aspect because what they're trying to tell you every single time is that this console is fun for these reasons and here's why it's fun. And they're always trying to extract the fun from the whole thing. And I think that's the best thing because in the West, we just go, look at these graphics, look at the
Right.
things this console
Right.
can do. And yeah, it's not the same thing, man. It's just like this is why I appreciate Nintendo so much.
So you were saying in one of our prior episodes, like the gap with the technology is starting to get to the point where it's not as like when you see PS4 to go to PS5, you're gonna be like you're seeing like okay, like it's a step up, but it's not as big of a leap, say going from cartridges to CDs, right? So that's putting the emphasis back on the stories. And you were talking about Nintendo does the best job. And it's funny because Nintendo, when you think about like Sega, well, not Sega, because they're more of a publisher, software person than hardware anymore. But like when you think of Microsoft and Sony, Nintendo is the one that like, man, the graphics aren't as up to par, obviously, but the stories and the games are still the best sellers. Like, and it's because they put all their focus for the most part on the narrative and the story, you know?
100%, 100%. So it's almost like they've been guiding us all this time
Right.
on what is important, and I think
Right.
fun is part of that reason as well. Because a lot of players nowadays are kind of like starting to say, "But yeah, it looks cool, but like it's not that fun, right?" Or it's the same as most games, or it's like it's a rehash of these things.
Right.
And Nintendo keeps like flipping the script every so often on things that can be done. I mean, they had Mario and they could continuously make Mario and sell a bunch of units, but they have instead like Paper Mario, for example.
Right.
Like who came up, like I want to know who came up with the idea of Paper Mario. Like it's
Right.
Mario, but it's like paper. How did that so? You know what I mean? But it's an amazing game. I don't know if you guys if you played Paper Mario before, but like it's my favorite Mario game. Like I love it. I love it.
No, I need to get my I think that's available on like the store, like for the
You are.
Switch.
Yeah, the Switch
Okay.
came out. I played it for the first time on the Nintendo Wii when it came out, and I
I
loved
think
it.
I need to get it for my daughters. I think they would actually be into. I mean, they love Mario Wonder and like anything with the Mario IP, from the Princess Peach one to Yoshi's Crafted World. Like Nintendo doesn't miss. So
Yeah,
I think it's about time. Maybe I need to download that for them. You know?
do it, do it. You'll
Okay.
see. Like it's one of the most creative games that I've ever played.
Okay.
A Super Paper Mario.
Okay.
It's amazing to actually find out how many things can they do when Mario is like 2D, and how many places can he fit when he's like paper thin, and how they play with the 2D versus 3D, and it's just so cool to see. They just went all bonkers on Mario, so it's a very cool game.
Okay. All right. Well, I will duly note it. Like, yeah, I usually buy them games like, maybe once a month. Like, so the last game, they're playing now. And I want to find out what you and your daughters are playing, but like they are playing this game called Chichia. I think it came
Oh,
out.
Chia,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it
Chia,
came out
Chia.
last year, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a really, really cool game. It was obviously like an indie game, but it has like a really cool vibe. And I love the fact that the character is like speaking in a different tongue. So it's like it makes you read the subtitles as opposed to making like a localization thing. It really engrosses you in like the story, you know?
that's so cool. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but like yeah, like the Nintendo, the way they actually don't focus on the engine is actually super super cool. And
Right.
another thing to say as well is that because now everybody's heading towards the same engine, everybody's using Unreal, it's becoming
Right.
like de facto. It means that it becomes all about the games, and
Right.
not so much about
Because the
like
playing field is pretty much like everyone's using the same tech. So who has the best ideas?
so who has the best ideas and who can
Right.
perform better and how fun is it to
Right.
actually play, right? So that I think that's going to be the ultimate goal now, and I think this is great for games. I think once
Right.
again, even though we are in a dark age of gaming, but I think it's great for games because like we need to get that fun that
Right.
Nintendo keeps kind of like hinting at all the time. It's not about the consoles, it's not about the graphics, it's not about the engine, it's about the game. How fun
Right.
is the game, right?
There you go. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you, what do you think about the future of it? But there you go. That's the answer. It's like not ironically, the future of game engines is now that we're all pretty much using the same game engine, is putting the focus back on what we like about games, which are the friggin' games. Like,
Because before it used to be like about like a specific like I don't know feature of a console, or it used to be like this is why a lot of games kind of jump on the train of like being one of the release titles because
right.
people can buy it because this title showcases this thing. Like on the PS3, I don't know if you remember a game called MotorStorm. Do you remember that?
Kinda.
MotorStorm.
Yeah.
it was basically like a rally, like racing game that had like mud and like
Oh,
ground,
okay. Got you.
like ground deformity and stuff. And nobody had seen that in a console before, like to actually kind of see the tracks of the cars, kind of like the grooves and stuff.
Oh,
As
nice.
they
Okay, got you. Got you.
Yeah, yeah. So it was really cool, and there was like physics. You could like explode the cars. You could crash against something and just explode and things. So it looked really good. But MotorStorm is a great game, by the way. You guys
Right.
should definitely play it. But it's not better than any other racing game. It's just that it was like they had a tech that hasn't seen before, so they kind of jumped on board on the new console, new cycle. Let's be a release title. And there's a lot of games, believe it or not, that actually do that. They actually kind of like jump on this bandwagon of like, we have this one mechanic that is different from anybody. Let's use it a lot. Like, Bionic Commando is a good example, right? It's a great game,
Yeah.
amazing, but they had one mechanic that they actually kind of like then squeezed the most out of it, and then
Right.
that's the thing that you do the most in the game. But then it becomes repetitive after a while, and I think that the way Nintendo sees the playing field is very much from the player perspective of like, it's almost like looking at like the youth and be like, now that they don't know anything about tech, they don't know anything about engines, they don't know anything about like game making or
Right.
development. They think this stuff is magic, but when you put a controller in their hands, are they having fun? Are they smiling? Are they actually kind of like understanding what's going on in the game? Is it simple enough, right? And stuff like that.
It's actually pretty genius because I feel like, again, especially when we were in our 20s and 30s, before the advent of kids,
Yeah.
and us having kids, when
Yeah.
it came down to it, I was like, yo, like I'd rather play PlayStation or Xbox because Nintendo always had the look of like, yo, that's for kids. But now
Yeah.
having kids, going back and playing those games, and I'm like, man, I know this is a system more skewed towards kids, but I'm playing with my kids. And on top of that, like after my daughter's finished playing and goes to sleep, I'm usually playing the games too because I'm like, they're just fun. Like,
Exactly.
yeah,
And it's like when you translate, because Nintendo has a few like more adult games, such as
right.
like Metroid or something like that, right?
Yes, they do.
And
They do.
they do, right? So, and when you play Metroid, especially when I played it on the Wii when it was like the first person one and stuff, like I could not have enough of that game. And it
Right.
was a first person game. And
Right.
arguably nowadays every single game feels like it's a first person game. But that game kind of got me hooked from beginning to end. It didn't have fancy graphics, I mean,
Right.
there was consoles that were better at that point and stuff, but the game mechanics, how it felt, the storyline, everything hooked me from the very beginning to the end.
Right.
So I was in, right?
Right.
So I don't think you need all these bells and whistles. As long as it's easy enough for people to get on boarded and it keeps you hooked from beginning to end, then I think you've done your job. And the scene nowadays is the perfect example of this, that they do this so well.
Right.
Um, I was just watching yesterday a documentary on Dredge, which is this fishing game
Mhm.
that at night like monsters come out of the water, and at day you actually fit. It's a really good game, really good indie game, top down
Okay.
view. Check it out for sure if you haven't so far. It's
Dredge.
Dredge, yeah.
And it's out. Like, when did it come out?
Oh yeah, last year I think he was
Okay.
nominated.
Okay.
It won quite a few awards as well. Dredge.
Okay.
But yeah, like that game, like I played it and I thought, man, the mechanics are so simple, first and foremost. But second, I got this game and I know what to do in this game in about 5-10 minutes max. Like I know exactly the loop of the game and I know exactly what to do, and I'm looking forward to more, right? Like now that
Nice.
I do it.
Right.
And I think that simplicity, like when you distill that to that simplicity, anybody can understand it. Hades is another good example, right? Like most people probably played Hades, Game of the Year, all these other things, but you get the loop within the first 5-10 minutes because
And
you
you're
die,
hooked. It looks
100%.
good. Like, it's
It looks
really,
good.
it works.
It works. You die and you're like, damn. And then you die again and you die again. And you get slightly annoyed at the beginning, but then you realize, oh wait, I have to die in order for the story to progress, in order for me
Right.
to learn more about. So then you kind of go, okay, so dying is not a bad thing. And then you
Right.
just keep on going through your
Right.
journey, and it's all good.
Right.
So I think that's basically what Nintendo does with every single game. And I don't know how they do it. They are magicians and they distill it to a bottle to just amazing. But that's what we hope to do it here as well in Proxima
Yeah.
without.
And just to let people know, we mentioned this before, and I think you can even see that from the trailers and stuff. We're using the Unreal Engine
Yeah.
for Warship Jolly Roger. So
100%.
And
Yeah.
it's really cool. I think the last thing I'll say about game engines, especially because it's someone new to me, like coming in on again from a background of more linear, getting into the interactive side where like dealing with blueprints and implementation and stuff and just how to get the sound working in the game, like not only in the game but also get it to work right, where like you're in this place so it sounds like you're in this place, right? Or you shoot something and it sounds like there's depth and distance and width and all that stuff. But that speaking of Unreal, Unreal has really made a lot of big steps over the last year, especially with this latest iteration with the meta sounds and getting it to make it. Unreal seems like it's like, hey, you don't even need, ultimately, it seems like they want to get to a place where they're like, you don't need middleware or anything. You can do everything in Unreal, which would be great because then you or the animators, the everything, like me as the audio person, we're all in the same sandbox as opposed to like, I'm using this to link to that, to link to this. Like if we're all in the same sandbox, it's easier to just walk over and like, you know, just thinking about it that way and like talk to me and get this to connect as opposed to, oh, let me go check what's connecting again. You know, middleware is necessary and I don't see it going anywhere for a while, but it really looks cool what particularly like Unreal is doing with meta sound. So as a person kind of getting into this and who works on that side, I'm excited to see them do more stuff where it gets to the point where you maybe don't ever need middleware, which would be awesome. It'd be probably less builds and cooks that you have to do, you know?
Completely.
So, yeah.
Completely. No, but you're absolutely spot on, Kyle. I think so. Like the idea, because like as an animator, like I spend like half of my time in Maya, which is basically the software most people use, and then basically you spend the other half in Engine. But in reality, you want to spend all of your time in Engine, because if you can actually animate within the engine, and if you can see the animation in real time and all these other things, then you are basically like one software for everything that can allow you to basically interact with other departments, and then the audio department can be like, the audio for that animation is now in, and then you just basically play it again and it's already there. Like you don't have to kind of like go like DCC is what they call, like go to one software to import the thing to then re-export and go into, like it becomes really convoluted, and if you miss a step, it basically just adds to the whole probability of something breaking. So going back to the beginning, when we talked about breaking builds, a lot of the breakages come from using different softwares and everybody pumping things from different softwares into Unreal, right? Like we have like the audio software that they call and Jordan are using right now in our game. But then we have the Maya software for animators, but then we have like the lighting software for whoever, we have the modeling software for the other department, and everybody's kind of like just pumping things into the engine from different softwares that sometimes are not really optimized amazingly. So I do think that the stroke of genius of Epic this time, because they had a lot of things that were not like up to standard, and on from 4 to 5 they did massive upgrades, because 4 was here for many years, and then when they upgraded to 5, the difference was not just because we thought it was going to be just a UI change for the most part, like what are going to change, because the engine is like done, is complete. But I think the stroke of genius is that they actually came in with basically an animation suite for all of us animators that you can now animate within the engine, which you couldn't do before. Now they have meta sounds for sound designers and stuff, so they can actually add it directly into engine. They have Lumen for lighting artists. They used to do lighting. Sometimes they had to actually go to Maya to the lighting to then import it or something like that, because they don't have all the things that they can actually have in engine, but now they do, right? We have texture tools as well for modeling artists as well. So there's lots of stuff that actually kind of like implemented, and this is Epic either buying other companies or kind of like developing things internally, and then implementing it within the engine. And yeah, it's amazing, and much power to them. And as you said, I think it's going to be many years until we kind of lose this middle software before we actually but we get in there. Epic is definitely giving everybody a run for their money, and I think a lot of companies are probably rethinking their strategy because of that.
Yeah, I did notice when we went to GDC, the company that makes Wise, Audio Kinetic, as well as FMod, they were really big about like, hey, come to our booth and see what we're doing, because FMod and this will be my last thing I'll say is like FMOD to me stands out and it looks more akin to what I'm used to as far as like the DAW digital audio workstation I use, which is Pro Tools, because it looks more familiar. Wise was like a little off-putting because it's not the sexiest GUI and it doesn't need to be. I get it, but at the same time, as a person who's more visual, I'm attracted to things that look easier to like. Oh, okay, this logically makes more sense to me. But now that Metasounds and Unreal has like I picked up on that and it started to make tools that rival these things, those other companies like. I'm sure they have things they're trying to implement and step up too. But yeah, like. Ultimately, competition is great because it breeds the best everything, usually. But for game making, I think simplicity would be really nice. And if we could all work in the same engine, I think, and this is just coming from someone who's kind of still new to this, it just makes the most sense. It's like the least amount of issues to get from A to B. And that's ultimately what we want to do.
What we want to do, and Tim Sweeney, which is the owner and head of Epic and stuff like that, he's big into like not only loving games but also understanding game developers because he's been through it. Like in games, many games that he has done that are classics nowadays. So he's considered a legend in the games industry.
Right.
But what he's trying to do, which is I think is super smart, is that he's not only trying to grow the company and make sure that he takes the best decisions like any CEO, but he makes those decisions like looking at the future of where we're going, but in order to actually facilitate the developers to make games a little easier. And I think that's really honorable, and I think this is why nobody sees him as any like a evil person in any ways.
Right.
Genuinely, the goal of the company is that they have a badass engine, they have a badass documentation and showcases, and everybody knows how to do certain things, and everybody gets excited when they release anything. But it's all for the betterment of better games and also easier time making games. And if one thing is true on this podcast, we'll be talking about it for every single episode, is how hard it is to make games. So like as you mentioned, Kyle, if you can just do it all in one software and also the tools are super easy to use, then, Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. Bob's your uncle. You said that before. Okay. What is that? You said that before early in the show. What does that mean?
Not in the US? Oh, snap. Sorry. It's the UK.
Yeah, I heard you say it before. I was like, I think he just said Bob's your uncle. I need to ask him about this. So I'm glad you said it. What is that? We'll end the show with that. What does that mean?
Yeah, sorry. For all the oldest audiences, they don't get it. It's basically like in the UK, there's lots of mannerisms like that. That basically means like, and that's it. That is the best thing. Or something like that.
Okay.
You don't really say it exactly with those words. You basically just have like a saying that basically means to everybody here in the UK.
Okay.
That is just like, and then it's done. And then, but that's basically what people say here in the UK. A lot of people say, and Bob's your uncle.
Okay.
And it basically means that like, yeah, it's done or it's awesome or it basically TBD or something like that. It can do TBD. They have funny things like that.
Oh my God.
I think it's a really good saying. So yeah,
well,
sorry.
I'll match that with the one I've been hearing, particularly not me. I don't say this, but the one I've been hearing. I heard my daughter say it the other day, and I was like, "Oh God!" Like I'm dealing with. It just made me feel old. Yeah. They usually, and I've heard when I was teaching my students say this, when they want to put in something, literally, they just say period. That's that. Period. They say period, almost like that's that in the conversation. Period. I was like, they're actually saying that the actual period is hilarious to me because I'm going to do that. Next time I'm talking, I'm paused. I'm going to just say and comma and then continue or ellipsis to be continued. Yeah.
They're going to say it like that. You are so played out. You're so old.
I'm going to start using Bob's your uncle and just see if people pick up on it.
Yeah, a lot of people will. I think a lot of people will. I might be wrong. But it's like here in the UK, everybody would use it. Unless you use it wrong, then people will be like, why are you saying Bob's your uncle?
Okay, well, Bob's your uncle. Harvey and I are your hosts. This is the show for the players. Proxima is the studio. Period. Peace.
See you guys in the next one.